I wasn't
Mutable
supposed to
super
stay that long.
senaro.
It started with a favor. Her daughter needed someone to watch her for a couple of hours, and I was the only one around who could step in. I told myself it was just babysitting, nothing more. Easy. But when the front door opened and she stood there, the whole plan I had in my head fell apart. She was in her mid-40s, I think. The kind of woman who carried herself like she'd been through enough to know what mattered and what didn't. Her hair was pulled back in this loose way that looked effortless, though I knew it wasn't. And her eyes, God, they didn't just look at you, they lingered, like they were deciding whether to let you in or shut you out. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice calm, practiced. But her hand lingered on the doorframe just a moment too long before she let me inside. The house felt lived in, not staged. A coffee mug sat half empty on the table, the faint smell of toasted bread still in the air. Nothing was polished for show. It was like stepping straight into her world unfiltered. I tried to keep things light. Small talk. Weather. School. The usual filler. But she didn't really answer in full sentences. She had this way of replying with almost nothing, just a or a glance, or a smile that didn't quite last. And somehow that said more than if she'd gone on talking. Her daughter ran off to her room after introductions, leaving me and her mother standing in the living room, the silence stretching thin between us. I should have sat down, but I didn't. She should have walked away, but she didn't. "Do you babysit often?" she asked finally, leaning against the counter, her arms folded, not defensive, exactly, more like she was keeping something in. "Not really," I said, scratching the back of my neck. "I usually just help out when someone's in a bind." She nodded, but her eyes stayed on me longer than they should have. The hours passed in fragments, her coming and going from the kitchen, me trying not to stare when she brushed a strand of hair back with her wrist, her daughter's laughter muffled through the closed bedroom door. Nothing remarkable happened, and yet it felt like something was happening constantly. At one point, she sat across from me at the table with a glass of water. She didn't drink it. Just rested her fingers on the rim, tracing circles without looking down. "You're quiet," she said suddenly. I laughed awkwardly. "You're the one not talking." Her lips curved at that, just a flicker of a smile, nothing steady. We didn't talk much after that. But the quiet between us wasn't empty. It was the kind of quiet that makes your chest heavy, that makes you wonder if the other person is hearing the same unspoken thing you are. When it was finally time for me to leave, I stood in the doorway, fumbling with my shoes. She leaned against the frame again, just like when I arrived, her face close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence. "Thank you," she said softly. And then, after a pause that lasted just a beat too long, "Maybe, next time, you don't have to come just for her." Her words hung in the air, heavier than anything else that night. I froze, halfway bent over my laces, unsure if I heard her right. But when I looked up, she was already walking back into the living room, leaving me with the echo of her voice and a pulse I couldn't slow down. I should have left it there. I should have just tied my shoes, nodded, and gone home. But the thing about her words, they didn't sound casual. They sat heavy, like she knew what she'd just done. I walked back the next evening under the excuse of returning a book her daughter had left in my car. Truth was, I could have dropped it off at the door. But I didn't. I knocked, and when she opened, I knew immediately she hadn't expected me so soon. Her hair was down this time, slightly messy, as if she'd been lying on the couch. No makeup, just tired eyes that still managed to look sharper than mine ever would. "You didn't have to," she started, taking the book from my hand. "I know," I said too quickly. And then we just stood there again, like we had the night before, in that same space where words weren't really the point. She let me in, though. She didn't have to, but she did. The house was quieter this time. Her daughter was at a friend's, she explained. Which meant it was just us. And somehow, that fact made the air thicker. She poured herself a glass of wine, asked if I wanted one. I said no, though I thought about it. She sat on the couch, pulled her legs under herself, and gave this tired laugh. You ever do something and then regret it immediately? She asked, not looking at me. Every day, I said. She swirled the glass. I told myself I wasn't going to talk. Not tonight. Talk about what? Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp for just a second, then softened. Doesn't matter. But it did. I could feel it. She just ended a marriage, I realized. Something about the way she avoided her own reflection when she stood, the way her ring finger was bare but faintly indented. That kind of mark doesn't fade overnight. I sat across from her, trying not to stare, trying not to notice how the lamplight caught strands of her hair or how her voice dipped low when she trailed off. She wasn't flirting. She wasn't obvious. But the vulnerability in the way she moved, it pulled me in harder than anything deliberate could. Why me? I asked finally, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Her brow creased. Why you, what? You said last night, maybe I don't have to come just for her. Why me? She didn't answer at first. She just set the wine glass down slowly, carefully, like it might break if she moved too fast. Then she stood and crossed the room, not in a rush, not hesitant either. She sat next to me, closer than she needed to, her knee brushing mine just slightly. Because you see me, she said quietly. And I don't even know how you do it. Her hand lifted, hovered, then landed lightly on my arm. Not gripping, not pulling, just resting there, as if she was testing how far she could go without crossing the line completely. I should have said something safe. I should have moved. Instead, I stayed frozen, the warmth of her hand burning through my sleeve. And the words caught in my throat weren't the ones I meant to say. But she leaned back slightly, eyes locked on mine, waiting. And that silence was louder than anything else in the room. Her hand on my arm shouldn't have meant anything. A small gesture, nothing more. But it felt like standing on a cliff edge. One wrong step and I was gone. I tried to make light of it, to shift the moment back into something safe. You say that like I've got some special talent, I murmured, forcing a half smile. But she didn't move her hand. Her thumb brushed, barely, over my sleeve. Not deliberate, not accidental either. Her eyes stayed on mine, steady and unflinching, as if she were daring me to look away first. I didn't. I couldn't. And then her phone buzzed on the table. The sound snapped through the air like a crack in glass. She pulled her hand back instantly, stood too quickly, and crossed to the counter. Sorry, she muttered, fumbling for the phone. She didn't answer it. Just stared at the screen until it stopped buzzing. Then she set it face down, her shoulders tense. I tried not to ask. But the silence stretched, and I couldn't help it. X? Her jaw tightened. Something like that. The room felt smaller, suddenly. The walls closer. I leaned back, forcing myself to breathe, telling myself this wasn't my business. She had a whole life, a whole history, and I was just a guy who happened to be sitting on her couch. But then she turned. And the look in her eyes wasn't one of someone thinking about the past. It was present. Focused. On me. I'm not good at this, she said quietly. At what? Letting someone in. Her voice cracked, just slightly, but enough. It was the first time she'd let something real slip through, the first time I could feel the weight she carried pressed between us. And that was the moment I should have pulled away, respected the distance she was trying to keep. Instead, I leaned forward without meaning to. My hand brushed hers where it rested on the counter, a quick, stupid mistake. I meant to move it back instantly. I didn't. Her fingers didn't pull away either. They froze beneath mine, then shifted just slightly, enough to hook against my knuckle. It wasn't a grab. It wasn't even clear. But it was enough. I swallowed hard, ready to say something, anything, to break the tension before it broke me. And then a knock at the door shattered the moment. We both jerked back like kids caught doing something wrong. She smoothed her hair, forced a casualness into her expression that fooled no one. I shoved my hands into my pockets, heart pounding like I'd run a mile. Just stay here, she said quickly, Almost a whisper. She crossed the room to answer. Through the crack in the door, I heard a neighbor's voice, friendly, nothing serious. But I barely registered the words. All I could think about was the way her hand had felt beneath mine. She closed the door a minute later, leaned against it, and looked back at me. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us moved. But everything in her expression said it. We were closer than we should have been, and it's only getting harder to step back. When she leaned back against the door, it was like all the air left the room with her. Her neighbor's footsteps faded down the hall, but neither of us moved. "You should probably go," she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. "Do you want me to?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her eyes flicked up to mine, sharp and searching, as if I'd just handed her a choice she didn't want. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she sighed, low and tired, and moved past me into the kitchen. I followed, even though I shouldn't have. She poured another glass of wine, but her hand trembled slightly when she set the bottle down. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, more to herself than to me. "What is this?" she said, turning toward me abruptly. "You. Me. Sitting here like we're not." She cut herself off, pressing her lips together, as if she'd said too much already. "Like we're not what?" My voice was quieter than I meant it to be, almost careful. Her laugh was dry, humorless. "You're too young." I shouldn't even have to say it out loud. I tried to smile, but it didn't reach. "You don't look at me like I'm too young." That landed. I saw it in the way her expression faltered, in the way she wrapped her arms around herself like she needed something to hold on to. "I just got out of something," she whispered. "And it wasn't clean. It wasn't good. I don't even know who I am in all of this yet. And then you show up." She shook her head, cutting herself off again. "And what?" I pressed, stepping closer before I realized I had. Her eyes locked on mine, unblinking. "And you make it hard to remember the reasons I shouldn't want this." The words hit harder than anything she could have done physically. For a moment I forgot how to breathe. I wanted to answer, to tell her I felt the same, but my voice caught. Instead, I closed the space between us just slightly, close enough that I could see the faint freckles along her collarbone, the way her chest rose and fell unevenly. "You don't have to say it," I whispered. Her hand lifted, hesitant, trembling, and hovered near my jaw. Not touching. Just close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her fingertips. The world shrank to that moment. No daughter in the other room. No neighbor outside. Just her, me, and the thin line we hadn't yet crossed. "I can't," she breathed, though the words sounded more like a plea than a rejection. I leaned forward, not enough to touch her, but enough that she could feel my breath against hers. Her eyes fluttered shut, then opened again, raw and desperate. And then she whispered the only question that could undo me completely. "What if I let you?" Her words were still hanging in the air. "What if I let you?" when the sound of her phone buzzed again on the counter. She flinched like it had burned her. I stepped back, giving her space, but I didn't take my eyes off her. She turned, reached for the phone, froze. The screen lit her face. A name. A picture. And in that second, something shifted. I didn't mean to read it, but she knew I had. "It's him," she said softly. Not even trying to hide it. "He still calls." "Your ex?" My voice sounded flat, though my chest was pounding. Her thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. "He thinks he can fix it. He thinks if he wears me down long enough, I'll let him back in." She set the phone down without answering, pressing her palm over it as if to smother the sound. For the first time, she looked scared. Not of me. Not of this. But of the pieces of her past that wouldn't stay gone. "I didn't mean to drag you into this," she whispered. "You don't know the half of it." Something in her voice cut through me, shame, regret, maybe both. I wanted to tell her it didn't matter. That I didn't care what came before. But before I could, she turned, her eyes sharp. "You should go," she said again. Firmer this time. "No," I said before I could think. Her brows pulled together. I mean, I don't want to, I added softer. You don't have to push me out just because he's still in the picture. You don't have to do this alone. Her lips parted, like she was about to argue, but then she stopped. Just looked at me, her expression unreadable. And then the twist came, not from her, but from me. Because I know him, I blurted. Her eyes widened. What? I swallowed hard. Not personally. But I've seen him before. At the bar near campus. Always loud, always drunk, always bragging. I didn't know he was yours. But I know the type. And you don't deserve to let him back in. Silence crashed between us. Heavy. Unforgiving. Her hand tightened against the counter. You've seen him? Yeah. More than once? I hesitated. And every time I thought, whoever's with him, they're paying the price for it. Her face softened, then broke. Not into tears, but into something worse, recognition. You shouldn't know that about me, she whispered. Not yet. Not like this. I stepped closer, unable to hold back. Maybe not. But I do. And it changes nothing. She looked at me, really looked at me, like she was trying to decide if she could believe me. Her fingers brushed the edge of the counter, her body taut with the weight of the choice. Then she said, almost to herself, it changes everything. And the silence that followed was so loaded, so fragile, that I didn't dare breathe. Her words, it changes everything, still hung between us like smoke, impossible to clear. I should have backed down, given her the space she was begging for. But instead I said the only thing that felt true. It doesn't scare me. I murmured. None of it. Her head snapped up, her eyes sharp, almost angry. It should. You don't know what I've carried. What I've let happen. What I've become because of him. Then tell me, I said, stepping closer. Stop holding it in and tell me. For a long moment she just stared at me, like she couldn't believe I was asking. Then, finally, her voice broke. I stayed. For years. Even when I knew better. Even when it stopped being love and started being survival. And I hate myself for it. Her confession hit like a wave. She wasn't detached anymore. She wasn't guarded. She was raw, open, and shaking. I could see her fingers trembling where they gripped the counter, the shame etched deep into her voice. I moved without thinking. I took her hand, not lightly this time, not by accident. Firm, steady. She tried to pull back at first, but then she stopped. You don't get to hate yourself for that, I said. You got out. That matters. Her eyes welled, but she blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. You're too young to understand what it does to you. What it leaves behind. Then explain it to me. Or don't. But don't push me away just because I wasn't there to see it. She exhaled, shaky, almost a laugh and a sob tangled together. You don't quit, do you? Not when it's you. The silence that followed was heavier than any words we could have said. And then, slowly, she leaned into me, not with hunger, not with desperation, but with something softer. Something truer. Her forehead rested against mine, her breath uneven. This is wrong, she whispered. Then why does it feel like the only right thing I've done in a long time? I whispered back. Her lips parted, and for a second, I thought she'd argue again. But she didn't. She closed the space, just barely, her mouth brushing mine in a kiss so tentative it felt like a question. I answered it by not pulling away. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. It was trembling hands, uneven breaths, the kind of kiss that carried everything unspoken, fear, regret, longing, hope. When she pulled back, her eyes searched mine, raw and uncertain. What happens now? She asked softly. I didn't have an answer. But I knew I wasn't leaving. Not yet. And for the first time, she didn't ask me to. The kiss lingered between us long after it ended, the kind of kiss that couldn't be brushed off or excused as a mistake. When we pulled apart, the silence wasn't awkward anymore, it was full. Heavy, but in a different way. I sat there with her, forehead still almost touching hers, and realized something. Nothing about this was casual. Not for me. Not for her. She sighed, leaning back, her fingers brushing against mine on the table. This time, she didn't pull away. I don't even recognize myself, she admitted. I swore I'd never let anyone close again, not after him. And then you. Her voice trailed, but she didn't need to finish. I'm not him, I said gently. And I don't want to be. Her eyes closed for a moment, like she was letting those words sink in. When she opened them again, there was a softness there I hadn't seen before. A kind of surrender, not to me, but to herself. You know this isn't going to be simple, she said. I don't want simple, I answered. I just want real. She let out a quiet laugh, almost disbelieving. But then she nodded, like she was finally allowing herself to agree. The night stretched on in quiet conversation, not about us, but about everything else, books, music, even her daughter. The heavy tension that had hovered for days eased into something gentler. I didn't push. She didn't pull away. It was enough. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. For a moment, it felt like the first night all over again, the doorway, the unspoken hesitation. But this time, she didn't hold back. She touched my hand, her thumb tracing lightly over my skin. Thank you, she said softly. Not just for tonight. For seeing me. I wanted to tell her I always had, from the very beginning. Instead, I just held her gaze and nodded. Some things didn't need to be said yet. As I stepped into the night air, I realized I wasn't walking away uncertain anymore. Whatever this was, messy, complicated, unexpected, it was ours. And that was enough. This wasn't a story about babysitting. It wasn't about favors, or mistakes, or even the past that haunted her. It was about two people who weren't supposed to find each other, but did. About the risk of being seen when you've spent years hiding. About the way love doesn't care if the timing is wrong, it shows up anyway. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't falling, it's choosing to stay. And we both chose to stay. Sparkles, did you enjoy the story? Speech balloon, what kind of stories would you like to hear next? Romantic, suspenseful, or something in between?